I am literally being tortured, and I just need you to know that before we start. Like, I need you sitting right there on this Discord call to just validate my struggle right now.
Oh, boy. What is it this time?
I have been sitting at a desk for an 8-hour school day, which honestly is a violation of my basic human rights at this point.
Uh-huh.
And then I get home, right?
Uh-huh.
And I'm trying to submit this massive history essay at literally 11:59 p.m. And my Wi-Fi decides to completely lag out, just the absolute circle of death.
Like the classic excuse.
No, I am fighting for my life out here. The education system and my ISP have teamed up, and it is giving absolute supervillain energy. It's unhinged.
Bro, are you actually done? Because the level of main character energy you are projecting over like a spinning Wi-Fi icon is honestly embarrassing.
It's a valid trauma. I am stressed.
It's really not. And I brought receipts today to completely humble you. Because for today's deep dive, we are looking at the actual history of how society got to the point where your absolute biggest problem in life is an 8-hour school day.
Okay, bet. What are we looking at?
We are diving into the age of social change in 19th century Europe and the Russian Revolution. And let me just tell you, your little 8-hour day, that would have been a luxury vacation for these people, like an absolute dream.
Wait, what? Are you serious?
Yeah. Before the whole societal system crashed and rebooted back then, industrialization in Europe meant men, women, and literal children were working up to 15 hours a day.
All up. 15?
15 hours in cramped, highly dangerous craft units and factories. And then they'd go sleep in these massive crowded dormitories with terrible sanitation.
Oh, ew, that sounds awful.
Right. There was massive unemployment whenever the demand for goods dropped. The towns were growing way too fast and housing was a complete disaster. So no, your lagging Wi-Fi is not the ultimate tragedy.
Okay, wait. 15 hours. Like actually doing physical labor, not just sitting at a desk.
Yes, grueling physical labor.
Okay, I am retracting my previous complaints. I am officially humbled. I would not have survived the 19th century. I would have been an NPC who just despawned immediately.
Exactly. You wouldn't have made it a week. So our mission today is to look at how people back then literally broke the system to get the basic rights that we totally take for granted today.
I'm listening.
We're going to unpack this massive vibe shift in Europe and how it led to one of the most chaotic, completely reality-altering events in history, the Russian Revolution.
So how did they even survive that without canceling the whole government immediately? Like, if I'm working 15 hours and sleeping in a room with 50 other sweaty dudes, I'm rioting. I'm literally rioting.
Well, they were definitely debating who should control power and how to fix things. Remember, this is post-French Revolution.
All right, the whole guillotine era.
Yeah, and the French Revolution basically proved to everyone that society didn't actually have to be controlled just by the aristocracy and the church forever. So you had these massive debates, and society kind of split into three main factions.
Okay, drop the lore. What are the factions?
They had the conservatives, the liberals, and the radicals.
Oh, bet. Let me translate this into Discord server dynamics for you. So the conservatives, they're basically the original server admins, right?
Go on.
The guys who set up the server, they want to gatekeep all the old rules, and they absolutely hate any new updates or new members getting perms.
Basically, yeah. The text says that earlier, conservatives generally opposed the idea of change completely. But by the 19th century, they kind of accepted that some change was inevitable.
But they still hated it.
Right, they firmly believed the past had to be respected, and any change had to be super, super slow. So grudging server updates only.
Right, like, we will add one new emote, but that's it. And what about the liberals?
So liberals wanted a nation that tolerated all religions, which was a huge deal because European states back then totally discriminated.
Yeah.
Like Britain favored the Church of England, Austria favored the Catholic Church.
Oh, so they were actually pretty chill.
Well, they wanted to safeguard individual rights against governments, and they wanted an elected parliamentary government with a well-trained, independent judiciary.
Wait, if they wanted an elected parliament, how are they a separate faction? That just sounds like standard democracy to me. Why weren't they just called Democrats?
Because here's the massive catch. They were not true Democrats. They didn't believe in universal adult franchise.
Okay, English, please. What does that mean?
Universal adult franchise means every single adult gets the right to vote. The liberals did not want that. They thought only men of property.
Wait, let me guess. Wealthy guys who owned land.
Exactly. Only wealthy guys who owned land should have the right to vote. No voting rights for women whatsoever, and no voting rights for poor men who worked in the factories.
Ah, okay. So they are the mods who want cool new rules in elections, but they only want the verified users, like the guys who paid for Nitro, to actually have a voice.
Yeah.
That is totally cringe. They want change, but only for themselves.
Totally cringe, which is why you have the third group, the radicals. They wanted a government based on the majority of a country's population. They heavily supported women's suffragette movement.
Meaning the fight for women's right to vote, right?
Yep. They opposed the privileges of great landowners and wealthy factory owners. They weren't against private property entirely, but they hated that all the wealth was concentrated in the hands of a very few people while everyone else literally starved.
Okay, radicals are the W faction. They actually want everyone to have a voice. But wait, how do we get from radicals wanting voting rights to the whole socialist movement? Because those feel like entirely different skill trees.
It's a natural level up when you look at why people were suffering. The economy was heavily exploiting people. Some radicals and liberals wanted revolutions just to overthrow the monarchs. But then you get this completely new economic theory dropping.
Socialism.
Exactly, socialism.
Yeah.
Early socialists, like this guy Robert Owen, believed in building cooperatives. This meant people producing goods together and dividing the profits based on the work they actually did rather than giving it to a boss.
Oh, that's cool.
He even tried to build an intentional community called New Harmony in Indiana.
A co-op server. Honestly, sounds like a vibe. But, like, how do you scale that? You can't just run a whole national economy on good vibes and teamwork.
Which is exactly what another guy, Louis Blanc, in France, argued. He felt cooperatives couldn't be built on a massive scale just through individual initiative. He wanted actual governments to encourage them and replace capitalist enterprises entirely.
Okay, that makes more sense structurally.
But then, the final bosses of the ideology entered the chat. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels.
Oh, the heavy hitters. Okay, lay it on me.
Right. And hey, for the record, before you listening to this think we are out here endorsing a 19th century political meta, we're strictly just reading the patch notes of history today.
Standard disclaimer, we are just the impartial messengers of the lore.
Exactly. We're completely neutrally seeing what these guys actually argued based on the text.
Proceed. What did Marx actually say?
So Marx argued that industrial society was fundamentally capitalist. The capitalists owned the capital, meaning the money and machines that were invested in the factories. But the actual profit of the capitalists was produced entirely by the workers' physical labor. Marx said the conditions of workers would never, ever improve as long as private capitalists were hoarding that profit.
Wait, let me make sure I get the mechanism here. Are you saying, in gamer terms, the workers are doing all the grinding, fighting all the mobs, but the capitalists are just sitting in the safe zone, keeping all the XP and the legendary loot?
That is actually a really good way to start thinking about it. But let's ground it in the real world to see why people were so angry. Imagine a factory worker makes a chair.
Okay, a chair.
The materials cost $10. The chair sells for $100. The worker gets paid $2 for 15 hours of work, and the factory owner keeps the remaining $88 as pure profit, just because his name is on the building's deed.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the math on that is highly toxic.
Right. Marx believed that to free themselves from this exact exploitation, workers had to overthrow capitalism entirely, destroy the rule of private property, and construct a radically socialist society where all property was socially controlled.
Wow.
A communist society.
So he just wanted to flip the whole board over.
Basically, he saw this conflict as inevitable. By the 1870s, these ideas spread all over Europe, and workers started forming associations in England and Germany to fight for better conditions, shorter hours, and the right to vote.
But they didn't actually take over the government in Europe right away, did they? Like, the admins fought back.
Oh, yeah. By 1914, socialists had never succeeded in forming a government anywhere in Europe. They had strong figures in parliamentary politics, but the conservatives, liberals, and radicals were still running the show.
So where did the system actually break?
To see a total system takeover, we have to look east. We have to look at Russia.
Okay, set the scene. What is the reality in Russia pre-revolution? I'm imagining lots of snow and absolute misery.
Well, you're not wrong about the misery. It's 1914, and Tsar Nicholas II rules this massive, unyielding autocracy. It's huge. It stretched to the Pacific, included parts of Poland, Ukraine, and Central Asian states.
That is a massive map to control.
And the economy was intensely agricultural. About 85% of the Russian Empire's population earned their living from agriculture.
85%. That's literally the entire server just farming.
Yeah, and industry was found only in tiny pockets like St. Petersburg and Moscow. But here is the fascinating mechanism. Russian peasants were fundamentally different from other European peasants.
Oh, so?
They actually already pooled their land together periodically, and their commune, which was called a mir, divided it according to the needs of individual families.
Hold up. They were already sharing the land based on who needed what. That is literal main character energy for socialism.
Right?
They were doing it practically before it was even a theoretical political movement.
Right. Some Russian socialists saw that exact thing and realized, wait, these peasants are natural socialists. So they theorized that Russia could become socialist much faster than other countries, because the peasants, not just the factory workers, would be the main driving force of the revolution.
That's actually genius.
But remember, the Tsar is still an absolute autocrat. All political parties were strictly illegal before 1914. They had to operate underground, setting up illegal newspapers and organizing strikes in secret.
I mean, if the admins ban all of their servers, people are just going to make private group chats. You can't permanently stop the spread of information.
Exactly. And the pressure was building rapidly. Let's jump to 1904. It was a particularly devastating year for Russian workers. Prices of essential goods skyrocketed so fast that real wages, meaning what your money could actually buy at the store, declined by 20%.
20%. If my money lost 20% of its value, I wouldn't even be able to buy lunch. That is devastating for people already living in poverty.
It was. So workers' associations grew massively. And when 4 members of the Assembly of Russian Workers were suddenly dismissed at the Butilov Iron Works, over 110,000 workers in St. Petersburg went on strike.
110,000. That's a whole stadium of people. What were they asking for? Do they want to overthrow the Tsar right then?
No, and that's the tragic part. Their demands were incredibly basic. They wanted a reduction in the working day to 8 hours, an increase in wages, and improvement in working conditions.
Wait, literally just the 8-hour day, the exact thing I was complaining about an hour ago.
Yep. So this guy, Father Gapon, leads a peaceful procession of workers to the Winter Palace just to present these basic demands to the Tsar.
Seems reasonable.
And instead of listening, the police and the Cossacks, which was the Tsar's military, attacked the peaceful crowd. Over 100 workers were killed and about 300 wounded.
No way did that actually happen. They just asked for an 8-hour shift and were massacred.
Yeah, they were.
Okay, my complaints about school are officially deleted from the chat. That is horrific.
It was called Bloody Sunday. And it started a chain reaction known as the 1905 Revolution. Strikes broke out all over the country, universities closed down, doctors, lawyers, and middle-class workers established the Union of Unions and demanded a constituent assembly.
Quick pause. What exactly is a constituent assembly?
It's a group of citizens elected specifically to write a brand new constitution from scratch. It meant they wanted real structural democracy, not just the Tsar making up rules.
So did the Tsar finally fold and give them one?
Kind of, but not really. He allowed the creation of an elected consultative parliament called the Duma, but he dismissed the first one within 75 days, re-elected a second one, and then completely packed the third Duma with conservative politicians who would just agree with him to keep his power.
Wow.
Yeah, he completely shut out the liberals and revolutionaries.
Classic corrupt admin move. Sure, we'll have a player council, but I'm only putting my yes men on it. Yeah. So he didn't actually fix the core problem at all.
Not at all. Which brings us to 1917. The lag from 1905 basically leads to a total system breakdown. World War I is happening, Russia is taking massive, devastating casualties in the front lines, and food is incredibly scarce. In the winter of 1917, conditions in the capital, Petrograd, were unimaginably grim.
Set the map for me. What does Petrograd look like?
The city's layout literally emphasized the class divide. On the right bank of the River Neva, you had the grim, freezing workers' quarters and factories. On the left bank, you had the fashionable areas, the Winter Palace, and official government buildings.
So literal physical separation of the classes.
Exactly. In February 1917, food shortages were deeply felt in the workers' quarters. People were literally starving. On February 22nd, a lockout took place at a factory on the right bank. The next day, workers in 50 different factories called a strike in sympathy.
Okay, genuine solidarity. That's powerful.
In many of these factories, women actually led the way to the strikes. This event is actually what came to be called International Women's Day.
Oh, wow. Slay. The women stepping up when the entire system is crashing.
Right, so the government tries to shut it down. They impose curfews, they call out the cavalry and police, but the demonstrators keep coming back, day after day. Finally, on February 26th, the government suspends the Duma entirely. The politicians speak out. On the 27th, the police headquarters are ransacked. The streets are packed with people demanding bread, wages, better hours, and democracy.
Okay, but if the Tsar still has the military, doesn't he just do Bloody Sunday Part 2?
He tries. He orders the cavalry to control the situation and fire on the crowds. But here is the massive historical plot twist.
What?
The cavalry refuses.
Wait, why? How does an entire military just disobey orders?
Because in the psychological breaking point, these soldiers were staring down starving mothers, exhausted workers, people just like them. They realized they had infinitely more in common with the starving people in the streets than with the Tsar sitting in his warm palace.
Oh.
An officer was shot at a barracks, and 3 other regiments completely mutinied, voting to join the striking workers instead. By that evening, soldiers and striking workers gathered in the same building where the Duma met to form a council, or a Soviet. This became the Petrograd Soviet.
The military literally joined the server revolt.
Exactly. The military commanders advised the Tsar to abdicate, and on March 2nd, he actually did.
The Tsar actually stepped down. The monarchy is over.
It's over. A provisional government is formed to run the country. This is the February Revolution. But the story doesn't end there, because the provisional government is mostly run by army officials, wealthy landowners, and industrialists. They kept Russia in World War I, and they didn't redistribute land to the starving peasants.
So the workers and socialists feel like nothing fundamental has actually changed.
Exactly. Enter Vladimir Lenin.
Oh, I know that name. He's the leader of the Bolsheviks.
Right. Lenin returns from exile in April 1917 and drops what are known as his April Theses. He makes 3 massive demands that hit exactly what the people want.
What were they?
First, the war must be brought to a close immediately. Second, land must be transferred to the peasants. And third, banks must be nationalized, meaning put under government control.
Okay, actually ending the war and giving land to the people who farm it, that is exactly the update that people were waiting for. That's a total boss move.
Through the summer, the workers' movement spreads like wildfire. Factory committees start questioning how industrialists run their factories. Trade unions grow. Soldiers' committees form in the army. The provisional government sees its power dropping and the Bolsheviks' influence rapidly growing, so they start arresting leaders.
The admin's striking back again.
Lenin fears the provisional government is going to set up a military dictatorship. So he starts organizing a secret uprising to take them down.
The October Revolution. But, how do they actually pull it off? Because taking over an entire capital city sounds impossible. Did they just fight in the streets?
No, it was incredibly calculated and structural. On October 16th, Lenin persuaded the Petrograd Soviet and the Bolshevik Party to agree to a socialist seizure of power. They appoint a military revolutionary committee under a guy named Leon Trotsky.
Okay, so they have a dedicated task force.
Yes, and the date of the event was kept completely secret. When the uprising begins on October 24th, they didn't just run into the streets yelling. They systematically took over the infrastructure.
Like a stealth mission, taking out the comms.
Exactly like a stealth mission. The prime minister leaves the city to summon loyal troops, and pro-government troops try to protect the Winter Palace. But Trotsky's committee responds instantly. They seize the telegraph offices, the railway stations, the bridges. They completely control the flow of information and movement.
Oh, that's why.
Late in the day, a ship called the Aurora shells the Winter Palace. Other vessels sail down the Neva and take over key military points. By nightfall, because they control the infrastructure, the city is under the committee's control and the ministers surrender.
Wait, they just took it structurally in one day.
In one day. Uprisings took place in other cities, and there was heavy fighting in Moscow. But by December, the Bolsheviks controlled the entire Moscow-Petrograd area.
Okay, so they actually did it. They broke the system, took over, and now they get to build their perfect socialist utopia, right? Everything is great now.
I mean, taking power is one thing, but actually running a massive country is a completely different reality. And this is where things get really, really dark. The aftermath.
Oh, no, I don't like that tone. I'm dropping the gamer jokes. What actually happened?
Well, at first, they moved fast to implement their ideals. They were totally opposed to private property. By November 1917, most industry and banks were nationalized. Land was declared social property, and peasants were allowed to seize land from the nobility.
Okay, so far they're doing exactly what Lenin promised.
In cities, they enforced the partition of large houses, so families living in slums had proper space. They even banned old aristocratic titles.
Changing the cosmetics.
They even designed new uniforms for the army and officials to visually represent the break from the past. They held a clothing competition in 1918 and chose this specific Soviet hat called the Bunavavka.
Taking time out of a literal revolution to prioritize the drip is wild, but okay. Where does it go wrong?
The honeymoon phase ended extremely fast. When the Bolsheviks ordered land redistribution, the Russian army basically began to break up. Soldiers, who were mostly peasants, wanted to go home to claim their land, so they deserted the front lines.
Oh, that's a problem.
And not everyone was happy the Bolsheviks took over. Non-Bolshevik socialists, liberals, and supporters of the autocracy completely condemned the uprising.
So it turned into a civil war.
A brutal civil war. You had three main groups: the Reds, which were the Bolsheviks, the Greens, who were socialist revolutionaries who wanted a different kind of socialism, and the Whites, who were pro-Tsarists, who wanted the monarchy back.
That's a messy free-for-all.
And during 1918 and 1919, the Greens and Whites actually controlled most of the Russian Empire. They were even backed by foreign troops: French, American, British, and Japanese.
Wait, why were countries like America and Britain sending troops to Russia?
Because the leaders of those capitalist countries were absolutely terrified that the socialist revolution would spread to their own countries. They wanted to crush it before it inspired their own workers to rise up.
Oh, wow. So they intervened to protect their own system?
Exactly. And the human cost of this civil war was horrific. Looting, banditry, and famine became common. But the Whites, the pro-Tsarists, made a fatal error. They took harsh, brutal steps against peasants who had seized land, trying to take the land back for the wealthy.
So they just alienated the biggest group on the map?
Yep. That caused them to lose popular support among the massive peasant population, which is ultimately why the Bolsheviks were able to win and take control by 1920.
Okay, so the Bolsheviks win the Civil War. They survive. Do they finally build a fair society?
Well, they create a one-party state. The Bolshevik Party, which they renamed the Russian Communist Party, became the only political party legally allowed to exist. Trade unions were kept under strict party control. And they set up a secret police. First called the Cheka, later the OGPU and NKVD.
Secret police. To do what?
To punish anyone who criticized the Bolsheviks.
Wait, serious? So they overthrew the Tsar for being an autocrat who suppressed free speech, and their solution was to immediately become the new autocrats and suppress free speech. That completely betrays the entire point of the revolution.
It does. Many young writers and artists had rallied to the party because it stood for change, but they quickly became deeply disillusioned because of the intense censorship and fear. And then Lenin dies in 1924. And we get to the era of Joseph Stalin.
I know that name. He's responsible for millions of deaths. How did he even take power?
Because Lenin had built this massive centralized machine where only one party had power and everything was controlled from the top. When Lenin died, that machine was just sitting there waiting for someone ruthless enough to pull all the levers. That was Stalin.
That is terrifying.
He pushes centralized planning to the absolute extreme. He introduces 5-year plans to force Russia to industrialize incredibly fast. It did lead to rapid economic growth, but the human cost was staggering. The working conditions were miserable.
Like the 15 hours a day again?
Worse in some ways. The text mentions a steel plant in Magnitogorsk built in 3 years, where workers lived so poorly that in the dead of winter, at 40 degrees below zero, people had to climb down from the 4th floor and dash across the freezing street just to go to the toilet.
I don't even have a joke for that. That's just inhumane.
And then there was agriculture. Stalin forced all the independent peasants into massive state-controlled collective farms called kolkhozs. Peasants who resisted and tried to keep their own land were severely punished, deported, or exiled.
Wait, but they just fought a whole civil war to get that land.
I know. Many burned their own crops and killed their livestock in protest. Because of this massive disruption, it didn't even fix the food problem. The bad harvests of 1930 to 1933 led to one of the most devastating famines in Soviet history, with over 4 million deaths.
4 million people starved to death from trying to force a system update that clearly wasn't working.
Yes, and it gets worse. Anyone who criticized these economic policies or pointed out the starvation was accused of conspiracy against socialism. By 1939, over 2 million people were locked up in prisons or brutal labor camps.
2 million.
The source text explicitly states most of them were innocent, but they were subjected to psychological terror, forced to make false confessions under torture, and were executed. This included many of the country's most talented professionals.
That is honestly just devastating. So they literally broke the system to stop the exploitation of workers. But because they concentrated all the power at the top, they just built a new system that exploited and killed people in a different, arguably much worse way.
It's intense. By the 1950s, the source text mentions that even hardcore socialists around the rest of the world acknowledged that the style of government in the USSR was not in keeping with the original democratic ideals of the Russian Revolution. Yes, a backward agricultural country had rapidly become a great global industrial power, but it had completely denied essential freedoms to its citizens and carried out its developmental projects through extremely repressive, violent policies.
Man. You know, to you listening to this right now, it is wild to sit here and complain about an 8-hour school day or a lagging internet connection when you realize the actual blood that was spilled over these concepts.
Yeah, it really is.
The baseline rights we have, the exact things I was whining about at the start, were paid for with literal revolutions, mutinies, and countless lives.
Yeah.
Those everyday workers marching on Bloody Sunday just for a standard workday are the reason we have the concept of workers' rights today.
It really puts things in perspective. The ideals of socialism definitely forced the world to rethink how society should treat its workers, and it changed the global conversation forever.
Definitely.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on what we just unpacked from the text. What happens when a perfectly designed utopian idea on paper meets the messy, unpredictable, and often corrupting reality of human power?
That is heavy. And on that note, I actually have to go log off and study for my history exam now because failing it after literally learning how many people suffered and fought for my right to even sit in a classroom, that would be the actual ultimate tragedy.
No study.
Yeah.
And maybe you appreciate your Wi-Fi a little more.
I'm going. Catch you guys later.